reality of this moment. That is not the reality that we are living in, and we've got some work to be able to get to that place. I come today in the midst of a moment where folk like me are struggling deeply in this country in the direction that it's taking. But I also come in this moment in the midst of the struggle being hopeful, because I believe we can get to this vision and we can get to this dream, but we've got some work ahead of us. We've got to put our hands to the plow and not turn back until liberation and freedom comes for everybody. Let me say that again. Where freedom and liberation comes for everybody who desires to be a part of this dream called America. That is the work we're doing. In preparation for the day, I've actually spent the better part of the last couple of weeks looking at Dr. Martin Luther King's letter to, not the letter to Birmingham, from a Birmingham jail. I spent a lot of time studying his speech at the Riverside Church 1 year before he died that was called Beyond Vietnam. Wholeness and being able to thrive. He said the first one was racism, and that we have to address the issues of racism in our country. The second one was extreme materialism and how it manifested itself in the way that America operated. And the third one was militarism. And he was talking specifically about what was happening in the Vietnam War, but we could really talk about the defense industrial complex and the millions and billions and trillions of dollars that we invest in defense spending every day. If you could imagine for a moment, if we were to step back and talk about the kind of conversation about racism. I've been listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, We Were 8 Years in Power. I spend a lot of time driving every day. I can't afford to live in D.C., so I live in Maryland, so I have an hour and a half driving to work each way every day. And so Audible has become my good friend. And I've been listening to the book and listening to him talk, and one of the things that he began to talk about was that we thought we had entered into a post-racial society when we saw Barack Hussein Obama get elected as the 44th president of the United States of America. And what we discovered was that we hadn't entered into a post-racial society, but that the undercurrent of racism and white nationalism and white supremacy that had manifested itself for a lot of years had just gone underground for a season until it had the opportunity to rule and to come above ground again. As you've seen over the last year, we have gotten into an age where folks don't feel like they need to wear the white sheets anymore over their heads, but that they're able to stand up and be bold about views that are racist, that are derogatory, that are absolutely damaging to people that don't look like them. I have friends from Charlottesville, Virginia, who were there in Charlottesville during the alt-white right rallies that were taking place down there, afraid for their lives. My good friend and colleague, the Reverend Tracy Blackman, was actually being interviewed on CNN at the time that the young man took his car and ran it into and killed the young lady that was a counter-protester there in Charlottesville. There's pictures of her being pulled off the air in the middle of an interview because the car was running up behind them and they were trying to protect her and keep her from getting killed. We are in a moment in our country where we are finally, I think, able to have a conversation about the fact of how racism is actually ripping out the soul of our nation. And if we are not willing to have honest, courageous conversations about how white supremacy and white nationalism is killing us, we will never be the country that we were destined to be. We will never experience the freedom that we can. See, the reality is this for me. I don't believe in black supremacy or brown supremacy or API supremacy or indigenous supremacy. I believe in humanity. And that all of us come together. And instead of seeing our diversity as somehow deficiency, I want to see our diversity as the capability for us to be able to celebrate our differences and thank God that we are all not exactly the same. If we were all exactly the same, this world would be boring. The reality is that, I like soul food, but it's not good for my arteries. And so some days I want to have wonton soup, and some days I want to be able to get an empanada, and some days I want to be able to have something different to be able to experience. And I thank God for all the different cultures, that we should be able to understand that our diversity is a cornucopia, not a cacophony. But there's so much rhetoric. There's so much angst. There's so much anger that makes us think that our diversity is a cacophony instead of being a rich cornucopia that God has provided for each and every one of us. I believe deeply in the intrinsic value of every human life, that regardless of your gender or your gender orientation or gender identity, regardless of your ethnicity or where you are born, whether you're born in the borders of this country or someplace else, that God has created you to have value and worth, and it is our responsibility as human beings to see the value and worth in every other person, because they too are the children of God. But somehow or another, we have gotten to a place and to a level of what I refer to as idolatry that allows us to think that only one people represent God's idea, instead of all of us representing God's idea. That we think one way of being represents God's idea, instead of understanding all of us represent God's idea. And then we understand that all of us are different. And our difference is a blessing, not a curse. Our difference is a blessing, not a curse. If we were to talk about extreme materialism, this is one of the raging issues in our nation right now. After the 70s, we thought we didn't really have to have a conversation about race anymore, and that we could just focus on economic issues. And if we focus on economics and not have a conversation with race, everybody would be all right. But you can't separate race and economics in this country. When the fact that the labor that built most of this country was enslaved labor that was brought over here on ships from Africa. And that labor, that slave labor that provided free labor, built the White House that Donald Trump is in, the White House that Barack Obama lived in, that labor built many of the institutions and plantations that are in this nation, and businesses that continue in this nation. I just found out the other day that one of our major insurance companies actually used to provide slave insurance. They're still kicking and doing their thing today, but built off the backs of the suffering of dark-skinned bodies. Built off the backs of the suffering of dark-skinned bodies. We have gotten into a place today where our bottom line is more important than the people that are creating the bottom line. And that we have put profits over people, and that ultimately we are working to destroy the bedrock of our community, which is the American family. I will give you a recent example of the tax bill that just passed through Congress. This very same tax bill that is now to be able to fund the $1.5 trillion deficit that was created is going to go after basic living benefits that help to support folk that are struggling in this country. So over the course of the next year, there will be a tax on Medicaid, there will be a tax on Medicare, there will be a tax on SSI, there will be a tax on education, there will be a tax on a variety of the services. TANF, temporary aid to needy families, will be attacked. Programs that provide food subsidies to SNAP programs, Supplemental Nutrition Access Program, will be attacked over this year. You can't tell me you care about families. You can't tell me your agenda is about seeing families thrive when you are attacking the very thing so that businesses can get tax breaks. So we are wrestling with this extreme materialism. Some years ago, when I was at Power, Philadelphia's organized with of indigenous folk and API folk, it is a fear that somehow or another those folk are going to get what we have, and we have to do everything we can to get everything we can right now and get it from them. But I'm here today to say to you that if we stand up together, we can change that system and make it such that every person in Pennsylvania and in our country can thrive, not just families. And people are afraid. So we're doing everything we can to either throw black people in jail or to throw brown folk and API folk out of this country so that people can maintain their power. I know that's uncomfortable to hear. Let me just say, I don't come from the sanitized version of King tradition. I come from the radical one, the one that was arrested, the one that really wasn't right. A friend of mine pointed out the other day, in 1966, Gallup did a survey of Dr. Martin Luther King and found out that he only had a 29% approval rating. But yet, somebody with a 29% approval rating at that moment, fighting for the soul of a nation, now we celebrate his birthday every single year when we come together at Martin Luther King Day. We are trying to militarize and throw people out of this country and say that we don't want them here. We are spending billions on a military. We have the biggest military in the world, bigger than any other country, and often several countries combined. We have more nuclear power than almost every other first world nation in this country and in the world, and yet we insist on trying to create fear that we need more military might. I want to suggest to you that part of the problem that we have in the world right now is because we have used our military might in a way that didn't liberate people, but actually put them in bondage to the United States, that has created some of the tension that we have in the world right now. That is really what it is. I made a note the other day when I heard our president's comments about Haiti and Africa and all these other nations. And I said very clearly that Europe and America has no right to call any country in the third world, any country in Africa, any country in South America, any country in the Caribbean outside its name. Because we have done more and raped and pillaged those countries of their human and natural resources so that we could benefit in this nation. We have got to speak up and call it out for what it is. Some of the things and some of the anger and some of the frustration that other nations that we are told we should hate have against us is justified. It is absolutely justified in the reason and the way that they behave and they think about us because of what we have done in those countries. We went over there and said we're creating democracy, and they get democracy and we get all their resources. We use our military in the wrong ways. And now we're trying to militarize our border, put tens of thousands of new officers on the border through the Border Patrol so that we can separate families and destroy our community. Racism, extreme materialism, and militarism still exist today. Amen. But I want to suggest that some principles that I think Dr. King would approve of, that if we live into them in a deeper way, will transform our nation and transform the world. So goes America, so goes the world. The first is that we have to have a recognition of the value of every human life. That every human life is worth something. And it is no better or no worse than any other human life. We have to get to a recognition that when I see you, I see the full human being that you are. I was at a lecture a couple of years ago given by Dr. John Powell of the Haas Institute out of UC Berkeley. I was at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference gathering that was held in Dallas, Texas. And Dr. Powell was breaking down the Harvard University study on implicit bias and was kind of explaining some of the results that came out of that. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but implicit bias is the study of the implicit bias, because when we do studies in this country and we take a look at the fact that black folk and white folk use drugs at the same rate, but black folk are 5 times more likely to be convicted and in jail because of those, it's implicit bias that is manifesting itself. It is the struggle that police have when they see somebody, that there is implicit bias that is manifesting in them in that moment in time. It is implicit bias that is at work in teachers when they are in schools, that our children of color, spend more time in suspension and detention than white children do for the exact same things. It's implicit bias that manifests itself in all these things, and part of it is because we fail to see each other as the full human beings that we have been created by God to be in this world. And so to be able to get to a place where we're actually able to address the challenges that we have in this moment, to address white nationalism, white supremacy, to address the hate and the anger and the bitterness and the wrath that is taking place, we have to begin to do some cultural change by helping people to have the conversations and to understand their own issues. I'm proud of my former pastor, the Reverend Dr. Dennis Wiley, who used to talk about the fact that as a black man, although he is a black man, every day he is wrestling with his own patriarchy and wanting to work to make sure that he's able to see his wife and other women as fully equals to who he is. When he was able to stand up in his pulpit before his congregation of hundreds and tell the truth, how about the rest of us stand up and tell the truth about the things that we wrestle with at the cores of our soul? And